quick word from this week's sponsor, Raycon. I spend a lot of time working on the channel while listening to music and podcasts, and Raycon's everyday earbuds are a must. They recently sent me their latest model, which has some really cool new features. I love the design and fit, and they come with new colours and protective cases. I have them in forest green with the Ocean Waves protective case. My favourite thing is how comfortable they are to wear, something I find quite rare. They're designed to comfortably fit the widest range of ears, and they have optimised gel tips for a custom fit. I can wear them for hours without any pain or discomfort, and I never have a problem with them falling out. They have a 32-hour battery life and multi-point connectivity that lets you pair with 2 devices at once. Pair once and they'll auto-pair for life. You can walk up to 33 feet away from your phone and the sound quality is still really good. The new quick charge function gives you 90 minutes of battery with just 10 minutes of charging. They're weatherproof and sweat resistant. You can use active noise cancellation or awareness mode, which are great features when you're out and about. Raycon's everyday earbuds are at such an accessible price point, and at Raycon you can get amazing deals every day of the year. But right now the sales are even better. It's time to save big for Black Friday. Go to buyraycon.com/operations today to get up to 30% off site-wide. That's 30% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/operations. It's the morning of the 3rd of July 1988. The USS Elmer Montgomery, a Knox-class frigate, is on patrol in the northern portion of the Strait of Hormuz Western Patrol area. At around 7 AM, USS Elmer Montgomery observes 7 small Iranian gunboats approaching a Pakistani merchant vessel. It is reported that the crew are manning their machine guns and rocket launchers. Shortly after, USS Elmer Montgomery observes a total of 13 Iranian gunboats breaking into 3 groups. Each group contains 3 to 4 gunboats, with one group of 4 taking position off USS Elmer Montgomery's port quarter. The USS Elmer Montgomery has already had to respond to a distress call from a merchant ship the night before. They are monitoring the situation in case the Iranian gunboats, nicknamed Boghammers, are planning another attack. It's a dangerous time to be transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Saddam Hussein's Iraqi government has been engaged in a brutal war with neighbouring Iran for the last 8 years. This conflict has now spilled over into the Persian Gulf, where both sides intensify what is known as the Tanker War. Beginning in 1984, merchant ships and oil tankers passing through the strait have been increasingly targeted, as both countries attempt to damage the other economically. Gunboats of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, based on the islands of Hengam and Abu Musa, have been attacking tankers and merchant ships bound to and from Kuwait, Iraq's main ally in the war. The US has moved into the area to support their national interests. They are tacitly supporting Iraq in the war, and have agreed to provide military protection to Kuwaiti tankers shipping Iraqi oil, in what they have named Operation Ernest Will. This has resulted in American casualties. On the 17th of May 1987, the Iraqi Air Force mistakenly attacked a US Navy guided missile frigate, the USS Stark, killing 37 American sailors. US Navy forces exchanged gunfire with Iranian gunboats in late 1987, and the guided missile frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian sea mine in April of 1988, leading the US to retaliate in Operation Praying Mantis. These incidents have led to new rules of engagement, and commanding officers have been ordered to take additional defensive precautions to protect their ship from enemy attack. The rules state that they do not have to be shot at before responding, and they have an unambiguous responsibility to protect their units and people. The USS Vincennes, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, has recently arrived in the Gulf and is patrolling near the USS Elmer Montgomery. She is one of only 5 cruisers equipped with the Aegis Naval Weapons Control System, a $1 billion, highly advanced computerized integrated battle management system designed to track and engage large numbers of enemy targets. The commanding officer is Captain William Rogers. He has served over 20 years in the Navy. The USS Coronado, an Independence-class littoral combat ship, is pierside in Bahrain. On board are Rear Admiral Anthony Less, commander of Joint Task Force Middle East, and his Chief of Surface Warfare, Captain Richard McKenna. At around 7:40 AM, the USS Elmer Montgomery hears the gunboats over the radio challenging merchant ships in the area, and at the same time hears 5 to 7 explosions coming from the north. Captain McKenna directs the USS Vincennes to proceed to the vicinity of the USS Elmer Montgomery to investigate the reports. He tells Captain Rogers to send his helicopter north to investigate, but to keep his ship further south in case more small boats emerge from the Iranian base at Abu Musa. The USS Vincennes SH-60B Seahawk helicopter, codenamed Ocean Lord 25, is on a routine morning patrol and is vectored north to investigate. Pilot Lieutenant Mark Collier reports seeing bog hammers milling around a German cargo vessel called the Dorlagiri. They aren't shooting, but this is a common harassment tactic. The Dorlagiri is contacted but does not need assistance. By now, the bog hammers have moved into Omani territorial waters, and the Oman Navy is on the radio ordering them to leave. This is Oman Navy. Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boats manoeuvring at speed. Your actions are not in accordance with the rights of innocent passage. Leave Omani territorial waters immediately. The USS Vincennes has also crossed into Omani waters, and shadows the bog hammers as they begin to leave. The Omani Navy considers this to be provocative, and orders Vincennes to leave as well. The USS Vincennes complies, but moves to support the USS Elmer Montgomery, who is close to another bog hammer group. At 8:40 am, Captain McKenna returns to his console, and is startled to see the USS Vincennes is now on top of the Omani Peninsula, about 40 miles north of where he had ordered Rogers to remain. McKenna orders the USS Vincennes to head back towards Abu Musa immediately. Captain Rogers obeys and leaves his helicopter behind to continue watching the Iranian gunboats. Ocean Lord 25 pilot Mark Collier is following the gunboats north as they retreat to their island bases, but he suddenly sees 8 to 10 bursts of light and sparks in the sky around him, followed by puffs of smoke. Believing that he has just been fired upon by airburst anti-aircraft fire, he drops the Seahawk to the safety of 100 feet and radios the Vincennes. Trinity Sword, this is Ocean Lord 25, we're taking fire, executing evasion. In hot pursuit, Captain Rogers sounds general quarters and proceeds north at high speed in the general direction of where Ocean Lord 25 had supposedly been fired upon by the small boats. The USS Forrestal, a Forrestal-class aircraft carrier, is on patrol in the northern Gulf of Oman area. Commanding Officer Rear Admiral Leighton Smith hears that the Vincennes helicopter has been fired upon, and he launches 2 F-14 fighters and 2 A-7 attack aircraft to support. They are directed to Point Alpha, a rendezvous point 50 miles outside the Strait of Hormuz. Once there, there will be less than 7 minutes flying time from the Vincennes. Moving at high speed, the USS Vincennes crosses into Iranian territorial waters. The rules of engagement now dictate that they can only fire their weapons in self-defense. At approximately 9:48 am, the USS Vincennes observes 2 groups of small boats closing fast on her position. The USS Vincennes is now directed to take tactical control of the USS Elmer Montgomery, and positions her 8,000 yards off her port quarter. At 10:09 am, Rogers radios Fleet Headquarters and requests permission to engage the small boats with his 2 5-inch guns. In Bahrain, Admiral Less's staff quiz Rogers on his position and the bearing of the gunboats, and ask if the small boats are departing the area. Captain Rogers reports that the small boats are not departing, and says they are closing on him and the USS Elmer Montgomery with erratic speed and course changes. His lookouts have also reported small arms fire coming from the boats. Captain Rogers is given permission to engage, and the USS Vincennes and Elmer Montgomery open fire on the 2 closing groups of Iranian small boats, including the group which had supposedly fired on Ocean Lord 25. The USS Sides, an Oliver Hazard Perry-class guided missile frigate, is approximately 18 miles from the USS Vincennes and is transiting from east to west through the strait. Commanding Officer David Carlson has been listening with concern as the situation escalates. At 10:21 am, the USS Vincennes is also directed to take tactical control of the USS Sides. 55 miles to the northeast, the crew of Iran Air Flight 655 are preparing for the second leg of their journey from Tehran to Dubai, after a routine stopover at Bandar Abbas International Airport. Bandar Abbas is a joint military and civilian airfield on the southern coast of Iran, and Iranian F-14s have recently been deployed there. At 10:17 am, Iran Air Flight 655 takes off from Bandar Abbas, 27 minutes after its scheduled departure time. Iran Air Flight 655 is an Airbus A300 carrying 290 passengers and crew. The captain is 37-year-old Captain Mohsen Rezaian, an experienced pilot and fluent English speaker who attended college and flight training in the United States. After taking off, the pilots are directed by the Bandar Abbas Tower to configure their transponder and proceed over the Persian Gulf on their 150-mile route, which should take just 28 minutes. Their transponder is squawking in Mode 3, a radio ping that identifies the aircraft as a civilian airliner to those around it. The aircraft is travelling along Commercial Air Corridor Amber 59, a 20-mile wide lane on a direct line to Dubai Airport. At his computer console in the USS Vincennes Combat Information Center, Petty Officer Andrew Anderson detects the unknown aircraft taking off. His job is to identify any air traffic within range of the ship. He tells the Aegis system to query the incoming aircraft for its IFF, identity, friend or foe. The airliner's transponder responds as Mode 3 Com Air, meaning commercial airliner. He looks over the Navy's listing of commercial flights over the Gulf, but when scanning the schedule, he doesn't see Iran Air Flight 655 listed. He may be confused by the Gulf's 4 different time zones and the aircraft's delayed departure time. The aircraft is closing on the USS Vincennes with a constant bearing and decreasing range. Anderson turns to the petty officer next to him, John Leach, and wonders out loud if it could be an Iranian warplane. Their superior overhears them and passes this message up the chain of command to the Vincennes tactical commander for air warfare. They are also monitoring an Iranian surveillance aircraft, a Lockheed P-3 maritime patrol aircraft. It's around 62 nautical miles to their west, flying down the Iranian coastline, and it is suggested that the P-3 could be coordinating an attack with the unidentified aircraft. However, the P-3 pilot responds to communication from the USS Vincennes and says that they will stay away. The Vincennes crew in the Combat Information Center are consumed by the surface engagement with the Iranian gunboats, and they are struggling to hear because of interference on their communication circuit. Over the erratic communication channel, an unknown voice says that the approaching aircraft is a possible Astro, the code word for an F-14. This galvanizes the crew, and at 10:19 am they issue the first challenge to the aircraft on the military air distress frequency. Unidentified Iranian aircraft, you are approaching a United States naval warship in international waters. State your intentions. It is worth noting at this point that Vincennes is not in international waters, but Iranian waters. Iran Air Flight 655 has been flying for 3 minutes. As it is a civilian aircraft, it is not equipped to receive messages over the military air distress frequency, so there is no response. Shockingly for an air defense cruiser, the USS Vincennes is also unable to tune in to civilian radio frequencies. At 10:20 am, the USS Vincennes issues further challenges on the international air distress frequency. Unknown aircraft, you are approaching a US naval warship. Request you remain clear. The flight crew have received a company notice requiring them to monitor the military distress frequency at all times. However, even if they can hear these messages, they may not realize it is their flight that is being challenged. Suddenly, the USS Vincennes forward gun misfires in the ongoing surface engagement. To permit firing of her aft gun, she executes a high-speed turn, and books, maps, and loose equipment fall everywhere in the Combat Information Center, adding to the high pressure and tense atmosphere. At the same time, the crew try to identify the aircraft again, and a momentary Mode 2 IFF code is detected indicating a military aircraft somewhere in the area. The system has likely picked up a signal from an F-14 that is based in Bandar Abbas. At 10:21, Iran Air Flight 655 closes to within 28 nautical miles. Captain Rogers informs Admiral Less in Bahrain that an Iranian F-14 appears to be closing in my position. My intention is to engage at 20 nautical miles unless he turns away. Do you concur? Admiral Less concurs, but tells the Vincennes to warn the aircraft before firing. All of a sudden, Petty Officers Anderson and Leach now begin frantically shouting that the aircraft, now tagged as an F-14, is descending and picking up speed, as though in an attacking dive. Data extracted from the ship's computers will later show this did not happen. Iran Air Flight 655 closes to within 20 nautical miles, but Captain Rogers still does not engage. At 10:22 am, the USS Sides illuminates the contact with her fire control radar, something that would typically cause a military aircraft to respond or leave, but there is no response. The USS Sides is equipped with computers that allow it to see virtually the same air picture information as the Vincennes. Captain Carlson has been told that it is a possible F-14, but he can see that it is constantly climbing, and that its speed is much too slow to be an F-14. The US Navy jets launched earlier from the USS Forrestal could visually identify the incoming aircraft, but their carrier commander, who is unable to contact Rogers, does not allow them to approach in case they are mistaken as an enemy aircraft. 7 challenges have been made on the military air distress frequency, and 3 on the international air distress frequency by the USS Vincennes. At 10:23, a final warning on the international air distress frequency is transmitted by the USS Sides. Despite being the final warning, this message transmitted by Sides is the first to actually call on Flight 655 by range, bearing, and, unlike the Vincennes warnings, its correct IFF Mode 3 code, information that would have alerted the pilots that it is in fact they who are being called. But it's too late. Captain Rogers has made his decision. Iran Air Flight 655 is 11 miles from the Vincennes, and if he leaves it any later, the aircraft will reach minimum weapons range. Rogers switches the firing key to free for his ship's SM-2 surface-to-air missiles. With the order given, the young Lieutenant Scott Lustig tries to fire the missiles, but he presses the wrong keys on his console a total of 23 times before finally finding the right combination for launch. Iran Air Flight 655 has been flying for 7 minutes and 8 seconds. It is 13,500 feet above the ground and 8 nautical miles from the USS Vincennes. At 10:24 am, the aircraft is hit. Shrapnel rips through the left wing and tail, and it plummets into the sea. All 290 people on board, including 66 children, are killed. There is a momentary cheer as the crew receive confirmation that the target has been hit, with one operator recorded saying, "We gave that guy his wish. He went to see Allah." It does not take long for them to realise the reality of the situation. Over the emergency frequency, they hear a desperate Iranian appeal asking paramedic units to, quote, "get to the downed Iranian airliner shot down by the Yankees to help possible survivors." They will soon come across the wreckage and bodies in the water around them. The incident caused global shock and outrage. In the immediate aftermath, the Pentagon and the White House recognized that it was a terrible accident, but initially claimed that the aircraft had been outside the commercial jet corridor, it had failed to respond to repeated warnings, and had been descending and picking up speed when it was shot down. The first investigation into the incident was launched by the US Department of Defense itself, and appointed Rear Admiral William Fogarty, the Director of Plans and Policy at US Central Command, to lead it. Information was collected through interviews, testimony, and data that was collected and analysed by professional experts. The investigation found that Iran Air Flight 655 was in fact on a recognised commercial flight path, squawking the correct civilian Mode 3 code, and had been on a continuous climb from Bandar Abbas before it was shot down. Fogarty could not account for the disparity between the system data and reports from various crew members that the aircraft was descending before it was shot down, so he requested a team of medical experts to conduct an evaluation of the crew. They found that stress, task fixation, and unconscious distortion of data to fit a preconceived scenario may have played a major role in this incident. This was put down to increased tension in the region and the recent attack on the USS Stark. The investigation concluded that the action taken by the USS Vincennes was justified because of the mistaken belief that Flight 655 was a military aircraft with hostile intentions. It stated that under the circumstances and short time frame to make a decision, Captain Rogers acted in a prudent manner, and the downing of Flight 655 was not the result of negligent or culpable conduct by the US Navy personnel. His recommendation was that no punitive action should be taken against the commanding officer or the crew. The DoD's investigation also stated that Iran must share principal responsibility for the tragedy, because the Iranians initiated the surface engagement against the USS Vincennes. It also criticised Iran for allowing a civilian airliner to take off from a joint military-civilian airfield, in close proximity to an ongoing conflict, and stated that the pilots were negligent for failure to monitor the international air distress frequency and respond to repeated warnings. The outcome of the DoD's internal Fogarty report was controversial, and 4 years later, an independent report was spearheaded by Newsweek correspondent John Barry and retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Roger Charles, in collaboration with Nightline, an ABC-sponsored program. They drew on declassified documents, video and audio tapes from the ships involved in the incident, and held over 100 interviews. Their report, entitled Sea of Lies, provided new information, and claimed that the Fogarty report was a Navy cover-up full of omissions, half-truths, and deceptions. They claim that Captain Rogers had a reputation before the incident for being overly aggressive. It says that officers on other ships sarcastically referred to the USS Vincennes as robo-cruiser, and that during death-bound war games, Rogers consistently pushed beyond the rules of engagement and showed patterns of being overly aggressive, provocative, and trigger-happy. The report claims that the USS Vincennes provoked the Iranian gunboats into a situation. A key finding of the report was that the USS Vincennes had crossed inside Iranian territorial waters before opening fire on the Iranian gunboats, and was still within Iranian waters at the time of the shootdown. They claimed that the Vincennes provoked and attacked the gunboats in Iranian territorial waters, which was a violation of international law. They also claimed that this was understood at top levels in the Pentagon, but was purposefully omitted from the Fogarty report to avoid humiliation. This view has been shared by Captain David Carlson of the USS Sides. He has publicly stated that Captain Rogers was actively pursuing the Iranian gunboats, rather than being pursued. If Captain Rogers felt threatened by the gunboats, he questions why didn't he just turn around and leave. He also criticised the Fogarty report for primarily focusing on the critical decision window leading up to firing the missile, instead of the actions leading up to that point that had caused the time pressure. For example, if Captain Rogers had not been cruising at top speed, and had not been actively involved in a gunfight with boghammers inside Iranian waters, he would have had more time to resolve the second issue of the unknown aircraft. He also questions why the Vincennes' helicopter was flying close enough to have been threatened by the light weapons on the Iranian small craft, as they were not supposed to approach any closer than 4 miles, and that it was in Iranian airspace at the time. He believes the Iranians were most likely firing warning shots, rather than initiating an attack, and even if they were, the helicopter could and did escape at high speed, so the gunboats no longer presented a threat when Captain Rogers decided to pursue them. Captain Rogers published a book in 1992 called Storm Center, and wrote an article in 1993 called Counter Battery to counter the arguments made against him. He did not agree with the view that his crew were suffering from stress, task fixation, and scenario fulfillment, and he continued to search for other explanations. In 1992, a master's thesis was published by Captain Kristen Ann Dottaway, which backs up Captain Rogers' perspective. Dottaway suggested that the existence of a second aircraft, a low-flying American A-6 intruder from the carrier USS Forrestal, was descending in altitude. He theorized that the track identification numbers of the Iranian Airbus and the A-6 were mistakenly exchanged by the Aegis system. What the system data actually recorded as Flight 655 on the ascent, the crew actually saw on their monitors as the A-6 on the descent. He also justified being in Iranian territorial waters at the time of the engagement with the Iranian gunboats and when the missile was fired, and claims it did not constitute a violation of international law. Dottaway suggested that the US ships were in international waters when the determination of hostile intent on the part of the Iranian small craft was made. His crew exercised the right to self-defense, and warships may enter foreign territory when military exigencies dictate. Whilst he deeply regrets the outcome, Rogers has defended his action, saying that he would do exactly the same thing again in the same circumstances because all information he had was telling him that the aircraft was a threat. His overall responsibility at the time was to his ship and his crew, and he executed what he had sworn to do. The Iranian leadership believed the attack was intentional, but even if it was just negligence, they claim it still amounts to an international crime. Even if the aircraft had been an Iranian F-14, they claim that the US did not have the right to shoot it down, as it did not follow the path of an attack profile, and did not illuminate the Vincennes or anything else with radar, and therefore did not constitute a legitimate threat. Iran sued the US government in the International Court of Justice in 1989, but the case was dropped in 1996 when the US and Iran reached a settlement. The US acknowledged that it was a tragic and regrettable accident, and offered $61.8 million to compensate the families of the people who perished. The US government issued notes of regret for the loss of human lives, but never formally apologized or acknowledged wrongdoing. In 1991, political scientist Robert Entman of George Washington University compared US media coverage of the incident with the similar shootdown of Korean Airlines Flight 007 by the Soviet Union 5 years earlier. According to Entman, framing of the incident by Time, CBS, The New York Times, Newsweek and The Washington Post emphasized the moral bankruptcy and guilt of the perpetrating nation. With Iran Air 655, the frame de-emphasized guilt and focused on the complex problems of operating military high technology. By de-emphasizing the agency and the victims, and by the choice of graphics and adjectives, the news stories about the US downing of an Iranian plane called it a technical problem, while the Soviet downing of a Korean jet was portrayed as moral outrage. Polling appeared to show that the coverage of the two incidents swayed American public opinion against both the Soviet Union and Iran. The crew of the Vincennes received combat action ribbons for their service in the Persian Gulf, maintaining freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz under Operation Ernest Will. Captain Rogers received a Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding service as commanding officer from April 1987 to May 1989. Thanks again to our awesome patrons whose support enables us to make these videos. Thank you to all our new patrons who joined recently, and a special thanks to our patron of the week, Real MCB. Each week we choose our favourite Patreon comments to shout out. This week Jake Devil says, "The classic, we have investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing." If you'd like to support us, please join our Patreon at patreon.com/The Operations Room and get access to exclusive benefits such as early access to videos, ad and sponsor free. We'd love to have you as part of our community and really appreciate your support.